Good evening and welcome to this Zoom call with Professor Gabi Barbash, in which he will speak, he'll give us some insights on the pandemic and exit strategies from the Israeli perspective. First, I'd like Professor Roy Ozeri, our Vice President for Resource Development, to give you a short overview about what's happening at the Institute right now. Professor Ozeri.
Welcome and good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight. I'd also like to use the opportunity and thank you for being our friends and supporters throughout the years, and especially at a time like this. It means a lot to us. I think we're now completing almost 7 weeks of maybe not complete lockdown, but heavy lockdown where the presence on campus was limited severely, and many of our employees, in fact, 70% of our employees, not the students and scientists, but rather all the administrative and technical staff were sent on a leave, paid leave. Now, together with slow exit from lockdown in Israel in general, the Weitzman Institute can also bring more employees on campus. In fact, from tomorrow, we're allowed 45%, so almost half our employees are allowed back, which is a big relief, I think, on two accounts. One is that it allows science to go, the science train to go back on its tracks. Even though there was there still is very extensive coronavirus research going on campus, and I'll say a few words about that in a couple of minutes. All the other science on campus has been seriously slowed down. And since we are a scientific institute which has scientific excellence as our main goal, we would like science to go back. And that would allow that to happen to a large extent. Last week, we were able to reopen all the core facilities on campus. So the chemistry core facility, biology, physics. There's still very intense focus on coronavirus research on campus. I think that this research, if we started off a month and a half ago with real urgency mode of researchers dropping their regular research and turning into COVID-19 research with the sense that they really need to come up with an answer in the short term, within weeks, within a couple of months. Now we understand that this episode is not going to be as short. We understand that this is something we'll need to cope with for the next year or two, and researchers are arranging their research logistically. They're making all the arrangements to do that. There's research on campus that touches upon coronavirus tests, coronavirus identification of outbreaks, not necessarily through RNA tests, but even through questionnaires. There's research towards drug discovery. There's research towards immunology. So there's really research from different angles of science. To support that research, we established a coronavirus response fund that would be able to support this research for the time to come. So yeah, these are interesting times. We're trying to balance between keeping scientific activity at Weitzman alive and even moving fast forward, balancing the needs to keep our employees safe and healthy, and be able to accelerate coronavirus research to the full extent. So with that, speaking a little bit about exit strategy, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Gabi Barbash, who will tell us some insights about exit strategies in general and in Israel in particular. Gabi graduated from the Hadassah Medical School at the Hebrew University. He has a master's degree from Harvard University. He was the CEO of Ichilov, of Tel Aviv's main hospital. And during that time, in parallel, for 3 years, he was also the Director General of Ministry of Health. Don't ask me how he was able to hold these two positions. In parallel, Gabi is also a professor of epidemiology at Tel Aviv University, And since 2015, we were lucky to have him join the Weitzman Institute and head the Bench to Bedside program. So Gabi, please.
Good evening to everyone. For you, it's probably noon, but here is almost night, and I want to thank you for the privilege to speak with you today. What I would like to do tonight is to try and share with you some of our insights after something like almost 2 months in this plague. And what I would like to do is first to start by telling you what do we know now about the coronavirus. Actually, what we do not know, because there is more that we do not know than we know. And then what have we learned from the experience in the world, a little about our Israeli experience, and then what should we expect? How or what can we expect for the future of the next year? So let's start with what we do know about the virus. It's now 3 months that we are in this epidemic or pandemic, and there are so many things that we really do not know. Let's start by simply what is the clinical expression? What is the clinical picture of this virus? This virus, coronavirus, is rewriting our textbooks. We thought that it started by viral pneumonia that complicated into what we call ARDS, which is acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is a phenomena that we recognize. We know about that phenomena in regular patients that are suffering from severe diseases. But now we know that there is much more than viral pneumonia and ARDS. We see multi-systemic phenomena expression of the virus disease that we originally thought that it relates to some kind of immunology response that the body is trying to fight the virus and cause some damage to the tissues like lung and other organs. And now, and that is only understanding of the last month, is we know that the basic pathology of the virus disease, the coronavirus disease, is combined from some hypercoagulable state, where the body is producing more blood clots that stick and plug small vessels in the lung and in other many organs of our body. And this is the basic pathology that this virus causes in the coronavirus disease. So what we originally thought to be an ARDS or this pulmonary or lung disease that is a complication of the viral pneumonia is much more than just complication of the viral pneumonia. It is most probably, and we see it a lot, many clots, blood clots that are blocking the arteries, the small arteries of the lung, and not only the lung. There is last week, in the last few days, we have reports of strokes in young patients with coronavirus. Also the same problem, plugs, clots, blood clots that are blocking main arteries in the brain and causing severe stroke in really young patients. What is amazing, I must say, is that all these insights are coming in the last few weeks as a result of the outbreak in the United States. Because, you should have expected that we will have these insights from the experience that we had in China or in Italy or somewhere else in Europe. It comes all from the United States, where the level of medicine is very high, intelligent, and they are running this research or observations of these patients in a much more thoughtful and profound way. And this is the result of that profound understanding of the clinical situation. So we started with what we know and what we do not know about the clinical picture, but there are many more questions that we do not have the answer for. For example, we do not know yet how many patients are asymptomatic. We know that this is a big chunk or big proportion, like between 30 and 50% of the patients that are asymptomatic do not express any symptoms, but they are infected and they can infect other people around them. We do not know how many patients each patient is infecting, is capable of infecting. The ratio is between 2 to 3 to 6 patients that can be infected by each and every one of the patients. So we do not know that answer yet. We do not know to explain, we cannot explain yet why some patients are having a very mild disease while others are having a severe disease. What is the differentiator between those two groups? If we would have known that, we would be able to treat them or maybe treat them earlier. So, and all these are questions that, you know, we are 3 months with this virus and we don't have the answers for. And even one basic elementary variable that is crucial for understanding this disease is what is the case fatality rate? How many patients are dying out of the patients that are infected by the coronavirus? To answer that, you need to have the answer about how many patients are infected, because you need to know what is the denominator that out of which you are calculating the mortality rate. And we do not know that denominator because we cannot appreciate today what is the number of patients that are asymptomatic. So here comes a new methodology. You know, we are identifying, we are diagnosing coronavirus by samples that are taken by swab that is inserted into your nose and to your throat, and that goes to genetic testing by PCR machines. And this gives you an answer whether the patient that you have examined have coronavirus in his upper airways or not. There is another method to identify, to diagnose whether the patient had exposure to the virus, and that is by serology, antibodies, that we develop after about 10 to 15 days of the infection. So this, what I'm talking about now, is the serology test. The serology tests are made by taking blood and examining the blood to identify whether there are antibodies to the virus that are in your blood, and that those antibodies are developed in your immune system about 10 to 15 days after the infection. So if you really want to know who is infected today, this is not the serology test that you are going to do. It is the swab that you are taking, and you get an answer after about 24 hours whether the patient harbor the virus in his upper airway or not. If you want to know who had been exposed to the virus 2 weeks earlier, then the test is the serology test, where you examine whether this patient has antibodies against the virus. So recently, in the last 2 weeks, I'm sure some of you have heard about that, there was, they announced that they have had this serology test in 2 areas, one in New York. They have examined 3,000 volunteers in grocery stores and so on, and looked to find out how many of these volunteers who were not defined earlier as patients of coronavirus, how many of these volunteers had exposure to the virus. And they have found that the number or the proportion of normal citizens in New York was about 20%, meaning that 20% of the population in New York has been exposed to the virus, the coronavirus. This, by the way, is a similar finding to another report that we have seen in the last week. They were examining some few hundred women that came to deliver babies in New York hospitals and were not infected by corona, but they examined them on a routine basis to find out whether they were carrying the coronavirus, and found out that 15% of these women that came asymptomatic to give birth in New York hospitals have been infected by the coronavirus. So these two reports, in a way, tells you that the prevalence of the virus in New York is about 15 to 20%. In a similar study that was done in a city in Germany, I think the city was called Ganglet, and this is a city that is located near Netherlands, and they have some carnival early in February, and had as a result an outbreak of the coronavirus. And when they have examined 1,000 volunteers in that city, they found again 20% of the volunteers had been exposed by serology tests to the coronavirus. If you take these two, if you take this number of 20% out of the population that are exposed to the virus, it brings you to understand that the true mortality rate of the virus is not, as we were talking, like 3%, 4%, and so on. It's closer to between 0.5% and 1% of those who are infected, including the asymptomatic patients. So we have to understand that, you know, when they were talking about mortality rates in China, in Hubei or in Wuhan, the mortality rate was around 6-7%. But when they discussed this in other areas of China, the same virus, the same disease, everything the same, they encountered only 1% of mortality. And this is another issue that we have to remember. It is the issue of how well is the medical system, the healthcare system, coping with the number of patients that are that it is confronted with. In Wuhan and Hubei, they were overwhelmed by the number of patients. In the rest of China, they had a smaller number of patients, and the healthcare system was more prepared for that. And as a result, the number of patients that died was smaller, and the percentage out of infected patients was around 1%. But coming to sum it up now, the case fatality rate, which is an important characteristic of the coronavirus, is between 0.5 and 1%. The problem is not with that. The problem is with the infectivity rate that caused many, many more patients to come and be infected. And as a result, this 0.5 or 1% is becoming a huge number that confront the medical system. Now, the most important questions that we have now when we deal with the virus, with the coronavirus, is the immunity issue, because immunity is what's going to get us through to the other side. And here we have a lot of questions that are unanswered. I mean, are we sure that the patient that was infected by the coronavirus is going to be immune and not infected again? Whether do we know if a patient that we found by serology test that he had antibodies against the virus, is he immune or not? Can we differentiate between a patient that have antibodies and is immune, and a patient that doesn't have, and a patient who has antibodies but is not immune? And even the question about the effectiveness of the coronavirus vaccine. Are we sure we are going to have an effective vaccine against the coronavirus? All of these questions are not answered as of today. What have we learned from the experience in the world? We have learned three major issues. One, if you don't take a very fast, quick steps to confront the spread of the virus, you reach a situation where the healthcare system, your healthcare system, is overwhelmed by patients. That is one. Second, closure of citizens help to flatten the curve of the spread of the coronavirus infection and allow the system to treat patients in a moderate way on a gradual basis. And thirdly, the importance of testing. Test, trace, and isolate. This is crucial to control the epidemic or the pandemic of the coronavirus. These are three elements, fast response, closure, and test. Many more tests. Now let's talk about the Israeli experience. Israel started confronting with the coronavirus late February with the returning of the Diamond Prince passengers that came here to Israel on an isolation basis. And the most of the cases that Israeli saw in the first few weeks were imported into Israel from other countries, China and later on Europe, Italy mainly. And we have seen them coming in, and as a result, we took all the actions that I will describe in a minute. Let's see the first graph that I prepared. Can we put it in? Mm-hmm. Here in this graph, you are going to see the daily confirmed case in Israel. You can see when it started, like the 1st of March, and it increased, and we reached a point where we have, on a daily basis, we accrued like 700 patients per day. And that was the time when we took action much more brutally, if I may say so. Let's see the other slide. On this slide, you can see the daily growth of new patients. Every day is the percentage of increase or decrease from the previous day. And you can see the steps that we took in order to confront this epidemic. So immediately when we identified the problem of imported cases from foreign countries, we blocked firstly China, then Italy, then Europe, then the whole world from airport arrivals. And every traveler that is coming today, regardless if he is in Israeli or non-Israeli or a foreigner, is forced today to go to a hotel for 2 weeks where he is being examined, and only then he is being released. If you look later on the 20th of March, we issued the stay home order, a total closure on Israel, no more than 100 meters out of your home, or you go to buy in the grocery and so on. That's it. And as you can see, we have decreased the duplication numbers from every 3 days duplication of the number of patients. It was 30% per day to something which is now 1% per day today, the recent days. So the epidemic in Israel is quite controlled, and in Israel we now have 1,500 patients with coronavirus, 200 mortality. About 40% of the mortality in Israel, similar to what's happening in every Western country in the world, is coming from nursing home. These are major sufferers of the coronavirus epidemic. And we are now in a position where we feel safer to take steps to alleviate some of the measures that we have imposed on the Israeli people here. What we are trying to do now, and I must tell you, this is a very delicate situation. And it is a delicate situation because we all understand that the virus is here to stay with us, and we look at experiences that we see in other countries. For example, Singapore, which is a very ordered and disciplined country. They have controlled the virus very well. And recently, over the last 10 days, they have doubled the number from 400 patients to 9,000, 4,000 patients to 9,000 and 10,000 patients, mainly coming from work migrants that are living 200,000 more work migrants that are living in Singapore, and their impoverished situation, and they were the source of the outbreak of the epidemic in Singapore. So we know that if you do not control the virus very carefully, you will get another burst of another outbreak of the epidemic. So on the other hand, the people in Israel are seeing the results of what they have invested and see that there are almost no patients. If you compare today, let's say, cities where there is an outbreak still going on, very small, but still going on, and that is mainly in the Haredi population, okay? And when you compare the number of new patients in the Haredi population, you see that there are, let's say if we have last day 200 patients, most of these patients are coming from very orthodox communities, and in Tel Aviv or Ramat Gan or Haifa, no one patient. So they look at that and say, why do you need to keep all these measures? Let us go to war. And they are right in a way, because here you are in a very painful dilemma. You know that the virus is here to stay. You know that you need, in order to contain the epidemic, you need to still have these measures going on. On the other hand, if you go on with those measures, you are going to lose the economy. There are more than 1 million, which is 10% of the Israeli population, that are out of work today. People ruin their work, the economic world and all the aspiration of many people in Israel are ruined today because of what happened in the last 2 months. So you need to cope with the demand from the public to see some measures to alleviate the restrictions and bring economy back into work. And this is a very delicate situation, and it's a delicate situation that you need to deal with modesty and transparency. Modesty, because really no one in the world had any experience with managing such a delicate situation and such a delicate balance between health and economy. And transparency, because we do not know, and you need to tell the public, look, we are going to take these and these steps, opening markets, opening groceries, allowing you to go to work, maybe even next week opening schools and kindergartens which are closed now. But you should know that we may make a mistake and we will have to draw back if things are not going well. So this is a very delicate situation, and the discussion is very hot here in Israel. There are a lot of, how they say, rebellions in Israel that say, you have, there are some even who are saying that you shouldn't have taken even the step that you took, because you should have given the pandemic or the epidemic go on its own, it will go on it, and it will disappear on its own. So there are a lot of noise, social noise in Israel, and this is the situation where we are now trying to bring back some of the economy, and on the other hand, keep the high tension, the people in Israel to be obedient to the masks and not go together in mass or in where there is dense population and so on. So this is what we do today, and this is the problem that the Israeli government, which is now in construction, is trying to solve. we have to understand, and here I'm going to conclude what I'm going to tell you. We have to understand, I know that every one of us, of us, is eager to return the life that we had before this pandemic came in. And this will not happen. I have to be fair with you. This will not happen before we have decent immunity, meaning I don't want to have the immunity of the population, because this will mean, if we are talking about herd immunity, if you know what I mean, this means that we'll have a lot of patients and a lot of disease and a lot of mortality. I'm talking about decent vaccine. Until we have a good vaccine, our lives are not going to be the same as it was before the pandemic burst on. And when we look on the history, and we know that the history turned to repeat itself, we look on what happened in other epidemics. Most epidemics are coming in waves. And also the big epidemic that pandemic that they were talking about, like the pandemic of 1918, came first in the spring and vanished, and then everyone was thinking that it is disappeared, and then it came in the winter, and the cost was 50 million people then at that time. So we know that we are dealing here, let's say, I'm not sure, I will reserve my saying. We think that we are dealing here with a pandemic that is similar to what happened like 100 years ago, and we need to be careful first in what we do when we alleviate some of the measures that are social distancing and so on, to keep on all of these measures that are allowing economy to go on, but on the other hand, keeping us from getting infected, like masks, social distancing, not going to, avoiding densely populated events like culture, music, and so on. And on the other hand, we need to prepare ourselves for the winter. Preparing ourselves for the winter, meaning that we need to make sure that the healthcare system is well equipped, know what to do, can take care of many patients, and hopefully by winter or little after the winter, we are going to have a vaccine that will allow us to go back to life. But I'm sorry to tell you, this is the projection that all healthcare, public healthcare experts are working based on. This is the assumption that we work based on it, and hopefully we can survive it well and enjoy the next winter more colorfully.
Questions?
Sure.
Okay, so first question, do you know if there are research or studies about epilepsy and corona, or people with epilepsy can be considered in a risk for coronavirus?
I don't know about anything that is a risk factor in epilepsy. The only thing that I was talking about is involvement of the brain, which may cause epilepsy, but not epilepsy as a risk factor.
Is there a publication on New York serology test? Can it be shared? Do we have reliability numbers on serology tests? Is there a preferred serology test?
The serology field is in development these days. I'm sure it's going to be improved in the next few months. The serology tests that were done in New York, I'm not familiar with what exactly is the serology methodology or the kits that they were using, but I'm sure they give quite a good picture. But these are going to be improved. I'm sure there are going to be also home kits for that. It will take a few more months.
Can the COVID-19 breach the blood-brain barrier? What kind of sticky protein does the virus elaborate to cause the
Coagulable.
Exactly, coagulable intravascular state?
I don't know. I don't think there is anyone who knows exactly what is the mechanism by which the coronavirus inflict the hypercoagulable state. They just discovered it, and recently, in the last month or so, we treat preventively all the patients with anticoagulant medications because of that. I am not familiar with, I don't think there is a report yet about the exact mechanism how the hypercoagulable state is caused by the virus.
What do you think should be done about those movements in the states to free people from quarantine?
I think this is a mistake. I think, I would say, generally speaking, the public health system in the United States is very good, generally speaking. I'm not familiar with each state. I would listen very carefully to what they tell you what to do. I'm afraid that you are going to be persuaded or forced to take steps that are not justified at this stage of the disease in the United States, and as a result, get a flare-up of the disease. So I would be very careful to listen to the public health, Fauci and other people that are involved in running this, and don't do any mistakes or even take bleach. How do you call it? Bleach?
Bleach, yeah.
Yeah.
If you're asymptomatic to the virus, would you test positive with the antibodies test, even if you have not been exposed to the virus?
I don't think so. I don't think there is a situation where a patient is positive in the serology test and has not been infected. There may be some cross immunity, and that may explain some of the patients that are not sick but are exposed, are not sick. We do not know yet enough to say if there is a possibility for you to be immune despite the fact that you didn't meet the virus.
Is Weitzman working on therapies for COVID?
There is one group at the Weitzman Institute.
Therapy meaning drug discovery?
Drug discovery.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
so drug discovery, of course. We have several. Near London is probably
Near London is working on some proteins that can serve to treat the coronavirus a few months before we know.
But also Sarel Fleischman is working towards that end, and Ron Diskin is working on the borderline between vaccines and drugs.
Yeah.
So there are several groups working on that.
How can we prevent the stroke surge?
We cannot. I mean, this is a complication of the disease, which is very strange in its behavior.
There is still no vaccine for HIV/AIDS. What gives you confidence that it will be possible to create a vaccine for the coronavirus?
I'll tell you, the issue, I'm not an expert in virology. I'll say what I think is the answer. The HIV virus is changing structure, genetic material very fast. Luckily, this virus does have mutation, genetic mutation, but the basic targets of the vaccine are constant, which are the chrome that he has, that the virus has. So if he would have changed his genetic material in a similar way to the HIV, we would be in trouble. This is not the case for now. But there is also the fear, I was saying that we are not sure that we have a very effective vaccine. Because if you develop the vaccine for virus A as it looks like today, and in a month or half a year, the virus changed some of its basic characteristics, we're in trouble.
How about plasma treatment?
Yeah, plasma treatment is let me just explain. Patients who are suffering from the coronavirus and convalescent and are becoming healthy most of them develop antibodies against the virus in their blood. So the idea is to take blood from this patient that are convalescing and take the plasma with the antibodies inside and give it to a patient in a moderate to severe condition. This was done in China, in the US, and in Israel. It's very difficult to assess the results of this. Some say that it is doing miracle, but we have learned that in order for us to assess and verify whether a medication, any kind of medication, is working, is to do a double-blinded randomized control trial to give one group of the patient, something else, and one of the group of the patient the plasma, and see whether the patient who get the plasma are in better situation. This was not done yet. These patients are being treated on a compassionate basis, and we hope that they are benefiting from that.
Any news from China, patient zero? What is the true story about the beginning of the pandemic?
I'm coming from the healthcare business, not from the security one.
Okay.
I really don't know.
Is there a preferred anticoagulant, Brillianta, ASA, antiplatelet, etc.?
I think they are giving short-acting anticoagulant to prevent that, like Lexan and so on, but this is not something that anyone of the audience would like to try before.
An airplane is a very confined space. When and how would you recommend air travel could resume with a reasonable degree of safety?
I think that this is a very important question. I think that airplanes or air travel is going to be problematic for two reasons. One is the personal risk that is involved by flying in an airplane where you do not know anyone or most of the people that fly with you. And secondly, because if you look on the risk of a country that was successful in controlling the epidemic, one of the major sources of new eruption of the epidemic is import of cases from other countries. So it will be, I foresee a long time before countries would lift up the barrier of incoming flights from other countries where they are not sure what is coming in the flights. So it's both the personal risk that is involved by flying and the measures that are required because of that, and also because flights are going to communicate again between countries and the potential of transfer of patients from one country to the other. So countries are going to be very reluctant to open the gates and risk by importing new coronavirus cases. So I think it's going to take a few more months at least.
What does the research say about the opportunity to get corona again and again, like any regular winter flu?
This is one of the questions that I mentioned that we do not know the answer yet. There are reports about patients that did have corona infection and became well, and then even became well with a negative swab test, and then came again positive. Currently, we wouldn't say that this is the case. We believe that the coronavirus is behaving, maybe we are wrong, that the coronavirus is behaving like other viral infection, that when you have infection, you are being immune against that virus for at least 2, 3, 4 years. We do not know yet if that's the case here with the coronavirus. It looks like that is the case, and what was reported, or the cases that were reported, are a result of the false negative test, which we know is about 20 to 30%. So maybe they were false negative, meaning that they were still carrying the virus, but the test was negative. And after a month, you can see again that the virus is positive in the swab test, but this means that he was positive also when he was tested negative. So we really do not know. We really hope that this is not the case that you can have it twice, one after the other. that would be a shame.
In the UK, there's a large proportion of Asian and Caribbean population who seem to have suffered the most. Also, there's a majority males rather than females who suffer. Do you know the reasons for either of these situations?
First of all, let's start with the end of the question. We do not know the answer why males are more prevalent than female. The difference is very small, but there is a difference. I don't know. I haven't read an explanation to that. What we are talking about, the elderly population, the aging population, we know that the aging population, especially those with comorbidities, with other diseases like hypertension, diabetes, and so on, are more prone to be infected, and when infected, are prone to be severely diseased with the need to the hospitalization in the intensive care unit and so on. So that's why we always say to the older population, like more than 60, 65, try to avoid as much as you can going out from your home. I know it's difficult. You have, grandsons and granddaughters and so on. There are ways to meet them. I'm not talking about Zoom, because Zoom is also an option, but there are ways to meet them in an open space, in the garden, with masks and so on, because we know that the risk population, which is the high-risk population, which is more than 60, 65 years old, and patients with comorbidities should be very, very careful, because they are more easy to get infected, and when infected, they are more prone to suffer from severe disease with all the ramifications of that. So we need to be very, very careful.
How many days is an infected patient contagious?
No answer to that too. We know that they are infected a few days, 2-3 days before they are becoming symptomatic. And we know that, for example, one of the patients that was brought in, Israeli patients that were brought in from the Diamond Priest, was infecting contagious for a month. So then you ask, why do you allow people to go after 2 weeks? First of all, we try to take the swab test before we let them go, but we had to put a line somewhere, and most patients are becoming healthy after 2 weeks. But we know that there are many patients that carry the virus for a longer period, until even months.
How is the interaction between scientists and labs all over the world?
I think that you would expect that the world would compete with such a challenge in collaboration and so on. This is not what happened in the political or commercial aspects of the worldwide commercial and political aspects. Every country was closed in itself and didn't, they were competing on equipment and so on. This is absolutely the opposite when you deal with the science. Scientists all over the world, regardless where they come from, maybe not from Iran, but all other parts of the world, are collaborating together. It took about 10 days since the first time that the virus was identified and the virus genomic was spread all over the world to all the laboratories, so that everyone could be able to understand the virus and develop measures against the virus. So the scientific world has totally opened in a way that we haven't seen before. And when people are talking about the future that may bring on us another epidemic or pandemic, the scientific world is going to be much more prepared for the next time than it was for this time. And that is because it did what the whole world should have done, but in the science perspective.
So I think this is a good question to be the last question. It seems all is bad news. The treatments are not 100% working, and the vaccine is due for the winter and might not work. Is there any good news?
Yeah, first of all, I agree. This is not, I mean, the main theme of my talk is that we are going to live with this virus for a long time. And the positive part of what I said is that we can control the level of the fire of this virus by managing our life in a different way. That's the positive side of that. Because I mean, I'll give you a paraphrase on that. You know, people in Israel were complaining about the stay-home closure for a month or something like that. And one of the Holocaust survivors here in Israel told me, look, Gabi, you know, when I was hidden under the bar, pig bar, okay, I didn't have Netflix at that time. So, I mean, proportions is all the story. We are here, we want to live, we need to take measures in order to live and survive that period, and we'll come out of it probably in the winter. Meanwhile, when the levels of the epidemics are going down, you can allow yourself to go out more, not in a dense populated areas, but to go out, to go to the park, to enjoy life, and less meeting other people, not by Zoom.
Thank you very much, Gabi, for these insights. I will ask Professor Roy Ozeri to wrap up the call.
I think that, as Gabi mentioned, I think we as scientists have a very big responsibility and a big role in trying to come up with remedies. I think this is science. This is science fine time. This is when we need to work and we need to deliver. And that's what we're trying to do. So with that, I would like to thank you and wish you best of health and a good rest of the day.